I'm Lena Matthews, 31 and on New Year's Eve. My sister opened the door, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You shouldn't have come." Behind her, my entire family was already gathered and no one even looked up. I stood at the gate of the house. I used to call home an old colonial in the suburbs of Vermont that hadn't changed in 5 years. Unlike me. I had told myself I'd never return here. Not after the silence, the cold shoulders, and the years of pretending I didn't exist in family photos. But tonight, I came back not for reconciliation, not for nostalgia, but because my father called, and something in his voice made it impossible to say no. The sky was bruised with snow clouds. My boots crunched softly on the frozen driveway as I approached the porch, one arm balancing a bottle of aged Merlot, the other a tote bag filled with carefully wrapped gifts. Every ribbon, every card inside was chosen with thought, one for each family member. And yet, nothing could prepare me for what was waiting behind that door. I had expected my dad to greet me. He promised he would. This time, it'll be different, he'd said. But when the door finally creaked open, it was Raina, my sister. She looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle catalog, hair in soft waves, a gold necklace glinting under the foyer light. Her face, however, did not glow. It hardened the second she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she said, not curious, accusatory. I managed a small smile. Dad invited me. Raina didn't move, didn't smile, just shifted her weight and crossed her arms. "Well, nobody needs your drama tonight. You should go before you ruin something." I froze. Over her shoulder, I caught a glimpse of the living room laughter, clinking glasses, the familiar scent of roasted meat drifting through the air. My mother in an apron, my younger brother Eli setting the table, even my grandmother, hunched but radiant, seated near the fireplace. The whole family was there, whole except for me. I stood on the threshold for a few seconds too long, feeling like a ghost who had shown up to a party uninvited. Then I turned, walked back through the snow, and got into my rental car. I couldn't even cry. Not yet. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the keys. Then Lena, a voice cut through the wind. I looked up. There he was, my father, barefoot in loafers, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He jogged through the snow toward my car. "Wait, don't go," he called again. His voice broke. So did something in me. I opened the door and got out, heart pounding. And in that moment, with snowflakes swirling around us and the front door still wide open behind him, I realized this wasn't over. Not yet. My father stood in the snow, breath steaming, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, urgency. He reached for my hand, like it was the last bridge left between us, and I let him take it, inside the house. The warmth was almost suffocating after the biting cold. The scent of cinnamon, rosemary, and roasted ham wrapped around me like a memory I wasn't sure I wanted. We stepped into the foyer, and I immediately felt the weight of a dozen eyes flicker toward me from the dining room before looking away just as quickly. "Let's talk somewhere quieter," Dad said, guiding me past the hallway, ignoring the strained silence behind us. He led me to the den, his space, a room that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old books, where a grandfather clock still ticked in uneven rhythm. He shut the door behind us and exhaled, like he had been holding his breath since the day I left 5 years ago. "I'm sorry, Lena," he began, voice low. "About Raina, about how you were treated. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice not to crack." He rubbed his hands together, glancing at the floor. "She doesn't speak for the rest of us, doesn't she?" I said quietly. His jaw clenched. "No, your mother and I. We wanted you here. I wanted you here. Because something's not right anymore. And pretending otherwise, it's wearing us thin." I finally sat down on the edge of the old leather armchair, setting my coat on my lap like a shield. You called, so talk to me. Say what you couldn't say 5 years ago. He nodded slowly. Raina's not doing well. Her marriage is strained. Michael moved out 2 weeks ago. They told everyone he was traveling for work, but he trailed off. And the school board I asked, I heard something about that. He gave a tight nod. They voted her off the planning committee. Some conflicts with other members. She's been lashing out more and more lately, especially at you. Why I asked. Not because I didn't have ideas, but because I needed to hear it from him. Because you left. And because you built a life she doesn't understand. She thought staying close, following the blueprint, would bring her happiness. Now she sees you out there thriving, and she doesn't know how to live with that. So instead of asking how, she blames. I looked at him. His face, once unshakably calm, was etched with exhaustion. And Mom, she's complicated. You know that. She doesn't deal with change well or conflict. She tries to keep peace by erasing anything uncomfortable. And lately, that's included you. I let the words settle. Let the burn of them travel through my chest. You know, I said, finally. The last time I saw Raina before I moved, she announced her engagement at my graduation party, and nobody said a word, not even you. His eyes filled with shame. I should have stopped her. You didn't. You all clinked glasses like it was normal, like it wasn't erasing me from my own celebration. I didn't know how to choose between my daughters. You didn't have to choose, I said bitterly. You just had to be fair. We sat in silence. Outside the frosted windows, fireworks began to pop in the distance, subtle bursts of color behind the trees. I didn't come back to beg for a place at this table. I said, I came because you asked. But if I'm just going to be the convenient scapegoat for everyone's unresolved baggage, I'll leave before dessert. He straightened up. No. That ends tonight. I didn't just want you here. I needed you here. To break this cycle. To say the things I was too afraid to say. My breath caught. I had never heard him speak with such conviction. I want you to come back in. Not as a guest. As part of this family. Because whether Raina admits it or not, she needs to hear you. We all do. The door creaked open a sliver. Eli peeked in, his expression cautious. Is she staying? He asked Dad. I hope so, Dad said, glancing at me. I stood, finally folding my coat. I'll come back in, but not as someone begging to belong. Dad nodded, as someone who never should have been pushed out. We walked together to the dining room. As we entered, conversations dimmed. My mother turned from the kitchen island, eyes unreadable. Raina remained seated, her wine glass still in hand, her gaze sharp but silent. I moved toward the empty chair at the far end of the table furthest from her, closest to the fire. It wasn't a position of honor, but it was mine now. I placed the bottle of wine on the table without a word. And in that quiet tension, I felt the floor beneath me shift not in fear, but in steadiness. I wasn't here to fix anyone, but I wasn't going to disappear again. I took my seat at the table, the farthest from Raina, closest to the fireplace. But the heat from the flames couldn't thaw the chill that hung in the air. Conversations resumed in stilted fragments, like everyone was playing a part in a poorly rehearsed play. I kept my hands in my lap, shoulders squared, breathing carefully so as not to take up too much space. Mother Sylvia was the first to speak. So, Lena, she said, carving the honey-glazed ham with surgical precision, Boston must keep you terribly busy. I imagine it doesn't leave much time for personal things. It sounded polite. It wasn't. It's demanding. Sure. I said evenly, but I love what I do. She murmured, as if that response confirmed something unsaid. Raina took a long sip of her wine before interjecting. Speaking of careers, I've decided to launch a bilingual daycare center right here in town. There's such a need for it, and I figured why not take charge instead of waiting for things to fall into place? Dad offered an encouraging smile. That sounds ambitious. It is, Raina said, straightening in her seat. But after everything that happened with the art therapy studio and the bakery co-op and the after-school program, I realized I need to build something that sticks. I bit my tongue, though I could feel Sylvia's glance flicker toward me. Raina had just summarized 3 failed ventures as casually as listing off groceries. No one dared mention the debt from those endeavors or the fact that our parents had quietly bailed her out. I think that's great, I said, meaning it more than I expected. If anyone can pull it off, it's you. Raina blinked, caught off guard, then gave a small shrug. Well, we'll see. I thought maybe, just maybe, that crack in the armor would open. So I leaned in, careful, and said, I've been working on a wellness initiative at my firm focused on mental health support for female employees, especially new mothers. We're seeing some good results. Raina snorted. Oh, she said, lips curving. Theory always sounds great in boardrooms. It's reality that's messier. I felt my face heat, but I didn't react. Instead, I reached for my wine glass. Sylvia chimed in with a brittle smile. Well, at least you two are both doing something meaningful. Although Raina's work will be right here in the community. There it was again, the comparison. Subtle as a slap in silk gloves. Dinner moved on in stiff rhythms. Eli tried asking me about Boston sports, clearly trying to steer the tension elsewhere. Dad mentioned a new espresso machine at his office and how he'd gotten it half off. I took that cue. I brought something for you, I said, reaching down and sliding a small gift bag toward him. Seattle roasted beans. Dark, smoky, and serious. His eyes lit up. Lena, this is amazing. I'll hide this from the interns. That little glimmer of warmth was almost enough to cut through the fog. I handed out the rest of the gifts, a vintage poetry book for my mother, leather-bound and annotated, something I found at a rare bookshop in Cambridge. She nodded her thanks, barely opening it. For the kids, I said to Raina, modular building sets made of recycled wood. It's a STEM kit, but fun. Thanks, she said, eyeing the packaging. Are you sure it's safe? Some of these foreign kits have weird chemicals. I checked. It's certified. Raina set it aside with a forced smile. I saved hers for last. I know you love planning and design, I said, handing her a navy blue notebook, engraved with her initials in gold. This one's from a local Boston artisan. Pages are pre-lined for goal mapping and scheduling. She took it, flipped through the first 2 pages, then closed it. Thanks. I'm actually moving away from planning now, so maybe someone at the daycare can use it. I nodded, masking the sting. But it got worse. Honestly, Lena, she added, not quite looking at me. You've always had a knack for getting things to fall into your lap. Jobs, attention, success. It's uncanny. The words landed like ice water. I met her eyes across the table. Nothing's ever fallen into my lap. Raina, you just weren't looking when I was scraping to stay afloat. The room went quiet. Sylvia cleared her throat. Let's move on to dessert. Shall we? Eli rose quickly, fetching the pie. Dad gave my shoulder a brief, grounding squeeze as he passed. I looked at Raina one more time. There it was in her face, a flash of something brittle, sharp, not hate, not jealousy. Something worse, resentment so old it had turned to habit. I took another sip of wine. The pie was sweet, the air was thick, and the knives were already on the table even when we pretended to shake hands. The taste of the pie still lingered on my tongue, but the sweetness had long since faded. Raina's last jab sat in my chest like a stone, and I could feel myself slipping into a familiar place, a silent retreat, a withdrawal. I'd done it my whole life, but this time, I stayed. That resolve lasted exactly 7 minutes. We had moved to the living room, settling into well-worn cushions and awkward positions that mimicked comfort. The kids played with their new toys, while adults sank into small talk. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, glass of red wine in hand, politely nodding along to Uncle Roy's story about snow tires when it happened. My elbow, careless and tight with tension, nudged the stem of my glass. It tilted, wobbled, then crashed sideways onto the cream-colored carpet. Wine bloomed across the fibers like a wound. "I'm so sorry," I gasped, lunging for the nearest napkin, already blotting, my heart thudding against my ribs. Raina didn't miss a beat. "Well," she said, voice laced with triumph, "some things never change, do they?" The words sliced through the room. Even the kids went still. She leaned back on the armchair, one leg crossed over the other, a smirk ghosting her lips. "Since kindergarten, Lena, always making a mess and expecting someone else to clean it up." I looked at her, my hand frozen above the stain. The fabric under my palm was warm, still damp. Everyone watched, waiting to see if I would laugh it off, apologize again, or retreat. Instead, I stood up. "No," I said, barely above a whisper at first. Then I lifted my chin. "No, Raina, you don't get to do that anymore." The room held its breath. I didn't come back to be dissected. I didn't fly across the country, drive through a snowstorm, and walk into a house I haven't seen in half a decade just to be reminded of every mistake I made before I turned 18. Sylvia stood up halfway. "Lena, maybe now isn't—" "Let her speak," Dad said quietly, but firmly. My hands were shaking, but my voice held steady. "You know what I remember most from my graduation night? Not the speech I worked on for weeks, not the diploma I earned. I remember Raina standing up and announcing her engagement, stealing every eye in the room, and no one, not one of you, asked me if I was okay." I looked at each of them. I remember calling home that first winter in Boston, when I had pneumonia and no insurance, and Mom telling me I should have stayed close like Raina. I remember birthdays where my calls went to voicemail, gifts that never arrived. I've tried, year after year, to stay connected, and every time, I've been met with polite deflection or complete silence. Raina scoffed. "God, you make everything about you." "No," I said, sharp now. "You made everything about you, even this. You hijacked every milestone I had and called it coincidence. You undercut me with smiles and turned the family into your stage." I turned to Sylvia. "And you let her. You made me feel like the only acceptable daughter was the one who stayed." Sylvia's lips parted, but nothing came out. "Dad," I said, softer, "you tried. I know you did. But peace at any cost is just a prettier version of neglect." Eli shifted on the couch, his face tight with conflict. I glanced at him, not asking for anything, but silently daring him not to look away. "I'm staying at the Belridge Hotel," I said finally, backing toward the hallway, "for 3 days. If anyone here wants to really talk, you know where to find me. But I won't keep fighting for a seat at a table that's already decided I don't belong." I picked up my coat. The door felt too heavy for my hand, but I opened it anyway. Behind me, no one moved. Only Dad's voice followed me, hoarse but clear. "Lena." Wait, I stopped halfway out the door. "This time," I said over my shoulder, "I'm not leaving angry. I'm just done trying to fit into a story I didn't write." And with that, I stepped back into the night. No tears, no breakdown. Just the sound of my boots pressing into the snow, and the door slowly closing behind me. I had just stepped into the snow, the cold slicing through my coat, when I heard it my name, called out not in anger, but in urgency. "Lena, wait." I turned. Eli was jogging after me, no jacket, his breath catching in the air like smoke. "You're not wrong," he said as he reached me. I should have said something years ago, but I didn't, and I let you carry the weight alone. I stared at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. He had always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper by omission. "Why now?" "Because I saw your face tonight," he said, and I finally understood. All those years, I thought staying out of it was neutral, but I see now it was just easier. A second set of footsteps approached. We both turned. It was Mom, still in her holiday sweater, her slippers crunching softly in the snow. She walked toward us with a glass of untouched water in one hand. The other hand was clenched so tightly. Her knuckles were white. "I didn't know Raina said that at the door," she said, quietly. "I thought you were late." Would it have mattered, I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. "If you had known, would you have done anything differently?" She blinked at the question. The snow fell around us in delicate silence, and for a long moment, she didn't respond. Then she looked down at her glass, then back at me. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I should have. I should have asked. I should have cared more about how you felt than about keeping things from falling apart." Behind her, the front door creaked again. Raina stood at the threshold, one hand gripping the doorframe, expression unreadable. She didn't speak right away, just watched us. Then, finally, she stepped out onto the porch. "I thought you'd already be gone," she said flatly. I replied, "But apparently, tonight isn't finished with me." She stepped forward, arms folded across her chest like armor. "If I told you I've been jealous of you since the day you got that full scholarship and packed your bags, would it change anything?" I searched her face for sincerity, but all I saw was fatigue. Not just from tonight, but from years of pretending. "Maybe," I said, "if it were followed by something real." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I hated how easy you made it look. Leaving, succeeding. You didn't even flinch when you walked away from all of us." I did flinch. I said, "You just weren't looking." Silence again. Then Dad's voice, firm and steady from the doorway. "Come inside, all of you." He motioned us toward the garage. It had once been a cluttered storage space filled with old bicycles and forgotten holiday decorations. But sometime in the last few years, it had been converted soft lighting, mismatched chairs, and a portable heater humming gently in the corner. A makeshift retreat, a neutral zone, one by one. We entered. Dad closed the door behind us and leaned against the frame. Mom took the folding chair by the heater. Eli sat cross-legged on an old ottoman. Raina chose a spot by the window, furthest from me. I remained standing until Dad nodded toward a chair opposite Raina. I sat. We were quiet for a while. No one seemed to know where to start. Until, from upstairs, came a sound we all knew. Thump, shuffle, click. The sound of Grandmother Rose's cane. A moment later, the side door opened, and there she was wrapped in a thick shawl, eyes sharper than any of ours despite her 92 years. "For heaven's sake," she grumbled, "if we're going to have a family reckoning, at least turn on the bright light so we can see who's scowling at whom." Dad chuckled softly and flipped the light switch. The room brightened. Rose lowered herself carefully into a wooden rocker. "Now," she said, folding her hands. "Say what you've been choking on all these years. Or don't. But don't pretend you're fine." The stillness cracked. "I was cruel," Raina said abruptly. Her voice was tight, as if pulled from somewhere deep. At the door, at dinner, I knew what I was doing, and I still did it. "I know," I said. She looked at me. "I'm not ready to explain everything, but I am ready to admit I was wrong." "That's a start," I said. Dad cleared his throat. "Lena, I owe you more than an apology. I watched it happen, Raina's spotlight, your slow fading. I convinced myself it would balance out, that you'd be okay because you were strong. That was cowardice. I wanted you to see me." I whispered, just once without her in the frame. "I see you now," he said. Mom looked at her lap, then raised her eyes. I grew up believing stability mattered more than happiness, that staying meant loyalty, and leaving meant selfishness. When you left, I felt betrayed not because of you, but because I never had the courage to go. Her honesty startled me. You had a job offer in Chicago, I said, remembering a long-forgotten conversation. She nodded slowly. I turned it down because I couldn't imagine life outside Vermont. You lived the version of me I buried. I never knew. I whispered. Grandmother Rose, who'd been silent, nodded with grim satisfaction. Truth has a funny way of surviving. Even when no one speaks it, it waits. Eli leaned forward. We've all failed each other. But tonight, I don't want to leave this room without something new. A new beginning, even if it's clumsy. He looked around. Can we agree to try? Everyone hesitated. Then Raina nodded. Trying is more than I've done in years. Mom wiped the corner of her eye. I want to know you, Lena. Not just read about you in Christmas letters. I want that too. I said, but it can't be one-sided. I need space to be imperfect here. Dad reached over and took my hand. You have it. For the first time in years, the silence in our family didn't feel like absence. It felt like breath held and finally released. A year had passed since that night in the garage, when truth finally breached the silence. And now, standing once again on the Matthews front porch, familiar wood beneath my boots, the same wreath on the door, I felt none of the dread I had carried like armor last time. The door opened before I could knock. Lena, my mother said, wearing a flour-dusted apron, do you want to help with the salad or the lemonade? No hesitation, no chill in her voice, just an invitation, ordinary and warm. Inside. The house looked almost exactly as it had the year before. Garlands hung across the staircase. The scent of rosemary potatoes and baked apples floated from the kitchen, and laughter bubbled from the living room where the kids were playing. But something essential had changed. The air no longer felt tight. I no longer felt like I had to brace myself. I slipped off my coat and walked into the kitchen, where Eli was chopping carrots and Dad was assembling a tray of drinks. Raina sat on a stool, bouncing her baby boy on her knee. She glanced up and smiled, a real one, not the tight-lipped version she used to wear like a mask. You're early, she said. I figured I'd beat the weather. I replied, hanging my coat, and maybe help Mom not burn the crust again, she added with a wink. I laughed. No promises. This was how it began, now casual, light, and honest. After that night in the garage, we hadn't become a perfect family overnight, but something had cracked open. And through that opening, we let in the work, the conversations, the therapy sessions, the willingness to sit with discomfort rather than patch over it with politeness. Raina had enrolled in a behavioral psychology course at the community college. She said it was partly to better understand her son, partly to understand herself. And for the first time, she didn't frame her ambitions in opposition to mine. Eli was engaged, now his fiancée kind and clever, someone who asked thoughtful questions and listened like it mattered. Mom still struggled sometimes, especially when traditions were challenged, but she tried. Last month, she sent me an article about workplace mental health with a note that said, "Made me think of you." It was a single sentence, but it said volumes. As we set the table, I noticed something new along the hallway wall. Family photos had been rearranged. At the center, framed in walnut, was a picture of Raina and me from the summer. We were holding her son, one arm around each other, hair windblown, cheeks sunlit. We looked like sisters. I didn't know you framed that one, I said softly. Dad appeared beside me, setting down a tray of silverware. Your mother insisted. I turned to her. She didn't say anything, just nodded quiet pride in her eyes. During dinner, Raina shared that she'd accepted a part-time administrative job at a nearby education center. It's not glamorous, she said, slicing her turkey, but I get to be home most afternoons. And I'm starting to like working with real data. That's huge. I said, meaning it. It's a start, she said, and it feels right. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to offer advice or compete, just support, because this was no longer a rivalry. It was two women figuring out how to be whole and sisters in their own way. After dessert, as we all migrated to the living room, Dad raised his glass. To family, he said, not perfect, still learning, but trying. Glasses clinked, laughter rippled, and someone turned on music that wasn't seasonal for once, just something easy and instrumental. I sat beside the window, the same one where I had once felt like an outsider looking in. Outside, snow was beginning to fall in soft spirals. Just as it had that night, I nearly drove away for good. But this time, I wasn't going anywhere. And yet, something in me had moved on. There comes a moment, not always loud, when you realize you no longer need to prove yourself to anyone, not even to the people who once defined you by what you lacked. That moment doesn't announce itself with applause or applause-worthy transformation. It arrives quietly, in the way you stand taller without meaning to, in the peace you feel while sitting at a table that once made you shrink. That's what this year gave me. Not a flawless family, but a real one. Not resolution, but clarity. I no longer measure my worth by whether I am embraced or rejected. I have learned to define it by the choices I make and the voice I no longer silence. So when the dishes were cleared and the chatter moved into smaller pockets, I stood, stepped into the hallway, and looked one last time at that photo of Raina and me. Then I turned, walked down the corridor alone, and opened the back door to let in a little fresh air. The cold didn't bite this time. It felt like something else entirely, like space, like freedom. Because in the end, dignity isn't something that can be handed to you, and real worth doesn't need permission to be seen.